4 are the Bethesda Studios, 5 are the main series Elder Scrolls games, and 6 are The Walking Ways, from enigma to enemy to teacher. What's good, people? I hope you are having a fantastic day. In this video, we are going to dive deeper into Elder Scrolls lore than we ever have before. We are about to explore the 6 walking ways. What are the 6 walking ways? Well, my friends, in simple terms, they are paths to transcendence. These paths don't all lead to the same place. The exact nature of this transcendence seems to vary based on which walking way we're talking about and how well the given walker executes their attempt at it. Also, I think that Kirkbride placed them in this order because the potential for total transcendence increases as we go downward. And they can be stacked. In fact, there's a case to be made that one can only achieve multiple walking ways. So folks, my research for this video has been quite an endeavor, so thank you for being patient. I've examined a lot of Kirkbride's works, and honestly, they're more complicated than most real-world scriptures. When I'm reading Kirkbride, my usual takeaway is, man, this is difficult, but somehow it's also the most genius thing I've ever read. My attempts to understand this man always leave me puzzled, but at the same time so enlightened. Most of the source material for the 6 walking ways comes from the 36 Lessons of Vivec. Some other sources I looked at for this one are the Mythic Dawn commentaries, Coda, and the unofficial works that Kirkbride wrote after his departure from Bethesda. Of course, we have to be careful with unofficial sources, but these particular ones have a lot of credibility since they were written by Kirkbride, and many of them are simply elaborations on his official works. So if we can use these to get a better understanding of what Kirkbride means in some of the more out there areas of his writing, then I think we should. I think that is valuable to us. So because of the very obtuse nature of this subject, we're not so much solving a mystery here as much as we're just exploring. We're discussing a few interpretations of what Kirkbride's vision for the 6 walking ways might be for fun. Let's begin with some basic information. Firstly, Vivec tells us that the Elder Scrolls universe is a dream. Whose dream? Kirkbride refers to this dreamer as the Godhead. And this Godhead dreams of something that looks like a wheel. And as the story goes, Anu and Padome, Stasis and Change eventually bring about the Atada, the original spirits. For more about the Dawn Era, check out the video I've tagged in the top right. The first of the Atada that Padome brought about was the being that we now know as Lorkhan, and eventually more Atada came into being. In these early days of existence, Lorkhan wandered the Arbis, constantly changing as he went. And he watched as the Arbis did the same thing, seemingly via the Kalpic cycle. Lorkhan was entertained by each new iteration of the Arbis, but he always inevitably got bored of them. So eventually, he decided to try leaving the Arbis. So he traveled as far outward as he could go and found the edge of the wheel. He examined what was in front of him, which looked like a capital I, since that's what a wheel looks like turned on its side. This eye he saw is what we commonly call the Tower, and as some of you might know, this is part of the process of achieving Chim, the 5th walking way. However, rather than achieve Chim, Lorkhan chose to do something different. He interpreted the Tower in such a way that allowed him to create his own dream within the Godhead's dream, Mundus. So he saw the wheel on its side, but did he actually see it from the front? Most assert that he did not, and that was part of a mistake he made along with his interpretation of the Tower. However, I think that asserting anything Lorkhan did as correct or incorrect is missing the point. What happened is he made a choice, and I believe the end result of that choice is really a very beautiful thing. Also, I think that he did see the wheel from the front, because how could he know how to create Mundus, the wheel's hub, if he didn't know how the structure of it worked? Regardless, we know that Lorkhan rallied some of the Atada together and they created Mundus. Kirkbride/Vivec seems to contradict himself about why Lorkhan did this. A source called The Tower claims that he wasn't quite sure himself, but did end up doing it and used trickery to do so. However, in More on the Psijic Endeavor, the claim is seemingly that he intentionally forewent Chim and created Mundus because he wanted to give every being an opportunity to achieve Chim. In other words, Mundus is designed to help guide beings through the process of Chim, which is much easier than going into it without any guidance at all like Lorkhan did. I think that he did know what he was doing, he knew what he wanted Mundus to be, and I think he probably did use some trickery to get what he wanted from the other Atada. So that's the basic story that we must know to delve into the 6 walking ways. This is really a subject that we can discuss forever. So I decided that for this video I'm going to focus on one particular aspect that for some reason a lot of fans seem to overlook. And what aspect is that? Well, I think that part of Kirkbride's vision or inspiration for many of the concepts that he set up in the Elder Scrolls universe is that the thing we're talking about here is a video game, particularly a series of open-world RPGs. So what exactly am I talking about here? A good example to start with is the wheel. As we've discussed already, this is Vivek's term for the structure of the Arbus. And what do wheels do? Their primary function is they spin, which results in motion. And a few sources confirm that this Arbic wheel does indeed spin, which is likely why Vivek refers to it as a wheel instead of some other round thing like a shield, a campfire, or a planet, for instance. So the existence of Mundus is contingent upon a spinning wheel. Let's rephrase that as a question. What wheel must be spinning in order for Mundus to exist? Here's a hint. While this was true when Kirkbride wrote the 36 Lessons of Vivek, it's not necessarily true now. Take a few seconds to think. It's this wheel, the disc. Yes, oh yes, I think that the Arbic wheel is indeed a metaphoric representation of a disc. So when Kirkbride was writing this, he was thinking, how would Vivek, someone with no comprehension of what a disc is, try to describe it? He'd say it's a wheel. Also, the Arbus is sometimes referred to as the Grey Maybe, so this grey wheel is the structure of the Arbus. Furthermore, we must discuss this passage from the Tower. What created the wheel? Anu and Padhome, stasis and change, both vast realms sitting in the void. They created it. Not vast, infinite, as the void was infinite. Imagine an infinity enclosed by another. You come away with a bubble. Now watch as the two bubbles touch. Their intersection is a perfect circle of pattern and possibility that we shall call the Arbus. The Arbus is the foundation of the wheel. So bubbles within bubbles, and/or bubbles colliding with other bubbles. You get the idea. The many worlds and realms of the Elder Scrolls universe are like a cluster of bubbles. Observe how light hits a disc. It looks quite similar to how light hits bubbles, doesn't it? So if you didn't know what discs are, but you did know what bubbles are, then you might look at this and say this is like bubbles within bubbles, wouldn't you? Hence, from Vivek's point of view, using a wheel and a cluster of bubbles to describe the Arbus makes a lot of sense. Also, in addition to the disc itself, what might look like bubbles interacting with other bubbles? The disc interacting with the disc reader. And what happens when the still disc reader intersects the moving disc? Stasis and change collide to form the Arbus on the screen. Now, to further our understanding of this concept of worlds within worlds, we must talk some philosophy. The concept that Kirkbride is toying with here is called skepticism, which fortunately I happen to be an expert on. In a nutshell, skepticism is the belief that absolute certainty is impossible. The sort of founding fathers, if you will, of skepticism are René Descartes and David Hume, but really the roots of it come from Plato. So while these guys are seen as the founders of skepticism, more modernized versions of it have come out recently, such as Gilbert Harman's Brain and That argument. But really nowadays it tends to come up more in fiction than academic philosophy. And that's because the concept is easy to explain via allegory and it often makes very captivating stories. A few examples of fictional works that use skepticism are Rick and Morty, The Matrix, Westworld, and one I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, Fallout 4. So if you're familiar with any of those, then you might know that the skepticism is often conveyed by things like worlds within worlds, or tiers of reality, if you will. Skeptics are often met with animosity because many people root against the idea of skepticism out of greed. You see, accepting that there is no objective truth means that no one is really ever right or wrong about anything. And greedy people don't want that, and they want for beliefs they like to be right and beliefs they don't like to be wrong. Fortunately for us, Kirkbride is not a greedy man. Video games are a perfect mechanism to convey skepticism with, especially open-world RPGs. I mean, how do any of us really know that we are not simply super advanced NPCs within a super advanced open-world RPG? So let's review. Kirkbride seems to like making metaphors and/or analogies to practical things in video games, and he seems to have some familiarity with skepticism. With everything we've covered so far in mind, let's examine a few quotes. The immobile warrior is never fatigued. He cuts sleep holes in the middle of a battle to regain his strength. Who do you suppose the immobile warrior is? It's the player, sitting still on their couch holding their controller with their eyes glued to the screen. And what are sleep holes? Saves. We, the players, save to go drink our caffeinated beverages and eat our sodium-rich snacks, then we pick up our controllers again and load the sleep holes, resuming right where we left off. Hallelujah. Here's another quote. "The tower is an ideal, which in our world of myth and magic means that it is so real that it becomes dangerous." So here Vivek seemingly knows, 1, that there is reality outside of the Elder Scrolls universe, and 2, that the Elder Scrolls universe is a fantasy work. But why are ideals particularly dangerous in his world? Well, because authors of fantasy works frequently use ideology to create conflict. So the tower, the ideal, can lead to conflict. Does that ring a bell with a certain story I told you a few minutes ago? Yep. Though I think a better example is Dagoth Ur. In short, he mistook himself for the Dreamer and thought the Elder Scrolls universe was his dream, so he sought to control it, thus becoming dangerous to the rest of the NPCs. Now let's talk about Sermon 4. In this sermon, Vivek seemingly says that some of the aspects of the Elder Scrolls universe are planned. Why? Well, because everything in it was crafted by Bethesda, thus planned. Everything that can happen is the result of something Bethesda did. The quests, the choices, the bugs, etc. Everything, intentional or unintentional, that occurs in Elder Scrolls games is the result of a plan. Make video games, sell video games, rejoice in playing said video games. Genius. Gartok Altadun. This Elnifex phrase comes up in a lot of sources. The literal meaning is hand weapon, but Elnifex is a language of expression, as I'm sure a lot of you know, so the literal meaning is not the complete meaning. There are a few theories out there as to what Gartok Altadun means, however I have a new one for you. I believe it means state of being the player. When you play Elder Scrolls games, how often are your character's hands in the air? Pretty often, and usually they're holding something that you might call a weapon. I mean, when a lot of players are first starting out, it often takes them a while to figure out that they can actually put their fists down. So yeah, I think that Gartok Altadun means state of being the player, which will come back as we discuss the Walking Ways. Now here's a quote from Sermon 11. "The waking world is the amnesia of dream. All motives can be mortally wounded. Once slain, themes turn into the structure of future nostalgia." The dream is the Elder Scrolls universe, but in this instance I think it's more of an expression. You know, like when you say living the dream when you mean that something is awesome. So when we're not playing Elder Scrolls games, we're out of the dream, thus the amnesia. During this amnesia, we're paying bills, going to work, etc. And eventually each game gets old, but then they become nostalgic. I mean, I know I play Morrowind and Oblivion sometimes out of nostalgia. So folks, with everything we've covered so far, let's explore each of the 6 walking ways individually and see if we might interpret them in ways that have context within the Elder Scrolls universe being a video game and in skepticism. The first walking way is the Prolix Towers. Unfortunately, there isn't much source material for this one. So what are the Prolix Towers? By definition, they seem to be tall structures of lots of words. So they're either literally the physical creation towers or they're what they represent. First, let's assume the latter. Each tower is thought to encompass a different story, aka lots of words. So this would be achieving transcendence through a long story. The only place I can think to go from here is elven ancestor worship. Elves, particularly Altmer, believe that Mer alone are descendants of the Aedra. The term Aedra actually means our ancestors. So this walking way could be seeking divinity through connection to it via the stories of the divine. As in, since we are the descendants of the divine, we are part of their stories, therefore we are divine. So how might we think about this in terms of video games? Well, gamers are all about nostalgia, aren't they? So we could think of this as achieving divinity via connection to the original Elder Scrolls games, or even just a general connection to the first video games. Also, if we think about this in terms of skepticism, we could go a step further and think of it as NPCs being divine in their world via their connection to our world. Or even a step further, being divine in their world through their connection to the concepts and/or beings that we worship. Now that's a cool idea right there. Now let's think about the former, the physical towers themselves. These towers always seem to equal power in Elder Scrolls, and sources seem to confirm that something about these towers is supernatural. So what I'm thinking here is that this could be a play on exploits. As in, instead of attempting a harder walking way, just build a tower. Also, perhaps the physical towers make the other walking ways easier. Maybe having a tower to look at rather than having to visualize one can help with the path of the Godhead. However, it would be sort of hard to see the wheel this way, wouldn't it? Well, I guess back in Morrowind you could use a levitation spell, but nowadays no. So now we're going out of order and jumping to the third walking way because 2, 5, and 6 really ought to be covered together. This one is commonly referred to as the Numidium, but really more appropriate names are tonal architecture and story rewriting. This is the walking way that the Tribunal, Dagobah, and Heartwights used to take power from the heart of Lorkhan. Sermon 27 offers some key insight into understanding this one. When you come out of the vocal, you can never be certain. Elder Scrolls started as an idea, spoken and written words. It's a creation made by people, and creations can be altered, thus their inherent uncertainty. Really, this notion is right out of Plato's theory of forms. We can't perceive perfect forms in our mundane world, but we can capture their characteristics in imperfect things. The cloves of the broken map are worn only by fools and heretics. The map is an exit for laziness. It is the dusty tongue, which is to say the given chart that most take as a story that is complete. No word is true until it is eaten. So what does that mean? The original idea that became the Elder Scrolls games isn't a mirror image of how the games actually came out. The vision changed throughout their creation. So only people that are too lazy or too stubborn to adapt still live by the original idea exclusively. The Elder Scrolls games must be played, they must be experienced to have meaning, not the other way around. So any truth within the Elder Scrolls games does not have to be accepted ahead of the experience, therefore one can use experience to define truth, or change it, as the Tribunal did. So in a nutshell, the third walking way is achieved by understanding that the Elder Scrolls universe is a creation and thus can be altered, changed, but how? By manipulating the Earthbones. These are the foundational principles that make the Mundus what it is. Therefore, they have the power to change what it is, and specific things within it. So how does one manipulate the Earthbones? Through sound, thus the name tonal architecture. And I think this is a reference to how Elder Scrolls started as an idea. It started with Ted Peterson, Vijay Lakshman, and Julian Lefay pitching ideas to each other. So they laid the foundation by using sound, therefore sounds can alter the foundation. And in a more literal sense, it means that the Earthbones exist in such a way that they can still respond to sound, which may be inspired by a principle of neuroscience, which is that sound, specifically music tones, can reach parts of the brain that most things can't. Many fans theorize that the Foom is actually a form of tonal architecture, and they have a good case. What happens when one shouts? A noise is made, then something supernatural happens. I think that some shouts may certainly trigger a response from the Earthbones, but I think that the Foom itself actually predates them. I think it's an in-game representation of Elder Scrolls being built on words, since it started as an idea, in a way making it the oldest power in the Elder Scrolls universe, which I may go into further detail on in a future video. Next up is the fourth walking way, the Enantiomorph, which fans commonly refer to as mantling. This one is done by replacing a god. And yes, this is what the hero of Kvatch did to Sheogorath in the Shivering Isles DLC. Also, according to Kirkbride, Talos mantled Lorkhan, which is a more complicated subject because of the nature of Lorkhan's existence during that period of Elder Scrolls history. As some of you might know, I have my own theories about Lorkhan, which I'll tag in the top right of the screen. To reference my terminology from that video, and assuming that Kirkbride's intentions on this subject have not been retconned, I think that Talos mantled Chezar. So how exactly does the Enantiomorph work within the context we've established? I think it has to do with coding. Walk like them until they must walk like you. Essentially, what the mantler must do to mantle someone is make themselves equal to the mantlee in order to trick the game's coding into equating both beings. Then they must push the mantlee up or down a few digits so that they are no longer equal to the mantler. The result is that according to the code's understanding of what the given being is, let's say it's Sheogorath, the mantler is now that being. Take Boethiah mantling Trinimac for instance. The exact details are often disputed, but she either literally or metaphorically ate him. Either way, she asserted herself as what the code understands Trinimac to be and pushed the real Trinimac out of that description. The result was that this was no longer an accurate description of the real Trinimac, who was now Malakath, but an accurate description of Boethiah. So according to the code, Boethiah is Trinimac. A practical example of what I think Kirkbride is going for here is quests that share a quest ID. Take Delivery in Skyrim for instance. For those who don't know, in Skyrim there's a few misc objectives that all involve taking an item from point A to point B, and the umbrella term for them is Delivery. And they all use the same quest ID, and the result of that is that only one of them can be active at once, and sometimes that leads to bugs due to the game getting them confused. So I think the Enantiomorph, the fourth walking way, is a play on this principle in code. When two things equal each other, the game can have trouble distinguishing them. Now it's time to discuss the second, fifth, and sixth walking ways in that order because these ones are sequential steps to the same end. But many NPCs do not make it all the way to the top. Let's refer to this staircase of walking ways as the Path of the Godhead. Sermon 21 offers some insight into this path. Look at the Majesty sideways and all you see is the tower, which our ancestors made idols from. Look at its center and all you see is the begotten whole. Second serpent, womb ready for right reaching, exact and without enchantment. The heart of the second serpent holds the secret triangular gate. Look at the secret triangular gate sideways and you see the secret tower. The secret tower within the tower is the shape of the only name of God, I. So what does all that mean? Well, let's slow down here and walk through each step individually. First, the Psijic Endeavor. Veloth describes the Psijic Endeavor as a process of glorious apotheosis, where time itself is bent inward and outward into a shape that is always new. Those who can attain this state, called Chim, experience an ineffable sense of the Godhead and escape the strictures of the world egg. A shape that's bent inward and outward. Once again, we're talking about the disc. And why is it always new? Well, I think it's because no matter how much you play Elder Scrolls games, there's always something you haven't experienced in them. A choice you haven't made, a line of dialogue you've never heard, a game-breaking bug you've never been claimed by, etc. So how does one achieve the Psijic Endeavor? First, visualize the first tower and the wheel, the eye and the disc. This entails one facing their reality, and the reality of the Elder Scrolls universe. It's all part of a video game series, which they understand as the Godhead's Dream. This process is referred to as zero-summing. It's an allegorical representation of facing skepticism, facing the truth that there is reality outside of the wheel, outside of the Elder Scrolls games. The NPC states, I exist, and the Godhead replies, you don't exist. The result is that the NPC is freed from at least some of the limitations of the dream, the game. As Kirkbride puts it, it's much like lucid dreaming, except they're within the dream instead of the dreamer. They can alter the dream, the game, to some extent and create within it, like Lorkhan did. As Mankar Camoran puts it, this is how mortals become makers and makers back to mortals. So let's pause for a minute here. Creating within the dream, how mortals become makers. Is there something within the analogy we've established that comes to mind here? Yes, there is, development mode. Yes, oh yes, I believe that the Psijic Endeavor is indeed a play on development mode. So this apotheosis is referred to as the state of Chim, but then why does Chim count as a different walking way? What is the difference between Chim and the Psijic Endeavor? Well, from what I've gathered, it seems to be omnibenevolence. Those that achieve Chim, as in the fifth walking way, love all beings and things within the Elder Scrolls universe, and those that only achieve the Psijic Endeavor don't. So how does one go from zero-summing to omnibenevolence? Well, this right here is what I like to call the beauty of skepticism, and I think that Kirkbride is very wise to go in this direction. By understanding that the Elder Scrolls universe and everything in it is designed for entertainment, an NPC can let go of their negative feelings such as hatred and embrace only positivity, love. Think about villains in fiction, the Sith for instance. Do you root for Darth Sidious and Darth Vader when you watch Star Wars films? No, you root for Luke. But do you hate Darth Sidious and Darth Vader? No, you are entertained by them because that's what they exist to do. Another example is tragedies. Think about a lot of Shakespeare's works. Are they sad? Yes. Are they entertaining? Also yes. Because there's a beauty in the sadness, in the negativity. So by understanding that the Elder Scrolls universe and everything and everyone in it is all part of the dream as well, one can learn to love all of it for what it is, a game. Whether they know it or not, everyone in the Elder Scrolls universe is zero-summed. They're not real. Well, at least not as real as you and me. They exist as part of a game to be entertaining. So I hate any of them. After all, a good protagonist is only as good as the antagonist, and a good resolution is only as good as the conflict. This is what one must embrace to achieve Chim permanently, thus completing the fifth walking way. Those that only make it through the Psijic Endeavor fail to do that, and my guess is they have to go through the wheel and tower again to temporarily reach Chim again. But the seconds they experience some sort of negative emotion like hatred, they lose it. Thus why it's the secret of how mortals become makers and makers back to mortals, because the state of Chim is not permanent. Once one achieves Chim as in the fifth walking way, there seems to be no going back. Which is great. I mean, an existence of only love, I want that. So why do some NPCs fail to achieve Chim? Well, that's the greed I talked about in the beginning. When someone only makes it through the Psijic Endeavor and not to the 5th Walking Way Chim, it tends to be because they're too petty or too greedy to let go of their negative emotions like hatred. And I think this is part of why Kirkbride puts emphasis on the letter I, because Chim is about mastery of the self, being in tune with one's own subconscious mind, thus conquering one's own flaws. One that knows Chim observes the tower without fear, more so he resides within. The fear is that embracing zero-summing, embracing skepticism, is in some way an admission of defeat. Imagine a theist and an atheist going through this process. A lot of extreme atheists would see embracing skepticism as an admission that they are wrong to scoff at theists, and vice versa, many extreme theists would see embracing skepticism as an admission that they're wrong to scoff at atheists. A sad number of people just refuse to let go of petty quarrels like that. This is why many fail to reach Chim and quit after only reaching the Psijic Endeavor. Zero-summing is a good thing, not a bad thing. Those that fail to accept that can't retain Chim. Those that succeed master themselves by letting go of that petty desire for victory over others, and they reside within the tower because they are in tune with their subconscious minds. They confront their flaws and conquer them, thus conquering the I, the tower. Lorkhan's case is unique. He forewent Chim in order to create a place designed to help others reach it. You see, if you can't experience hatred, then you can't really create it, can you? So without that first-hand experience, any attempts to create it would come across as ingenuine. You know the saying, write what you know? People say that because using your real experience, your real feelings, always makes your stories more believable. So that's why Lorkhan forewent Chim. He wanted to use his understanding of negativity to create it in Mundus. Because in order to overcome negativity, one needs to know it, so he made a place for beings to experience it, and thus giving them a chance to overcome it, thus achieving Chim. This process is embodied by what Vivek refers to as the secret triangular gate, which is in the whole of the disc. Why a triangle? Many fans think of the tribunal here, however I think there's a bit more to it than that. For those who aren't familiar with psychology of shapes, people tend to associate triangles with bad things, aka negativity. So I think that passing through the secret triangular gate is symbolism for conquering the self by leaving one's own negativity behind. But that's not all either. I also think it's an embodiment of something, which will come back later. So beings that achieve the 5th Walking Way Chim can stay in development mode for as long as they want. Now for the final step along the path of the Godhead, the 6th Walking Way, the scarab that transforms into the new man. The goal of this one is to become an Amaranth. So how does one do that? Let's begin with the final bit of Vivek's instructions. One must look at the secret triangular gate sideways to see the secret tower. Now remember, at this point we are in the Begotten Whole, the center of the disc, at the triangular gate. Think about what one would see if they looked at this triangular gate sideways. They'd see the eye formed by the triangular gate enclosed by the eye formed by the interior of the disc. Like this, an eye within an infinite eye. So what's the symbolism here? Well, I believe that becoming an Amaranth is about taking omnibenevolence to a whole nother level. One must realize that everything in the Elder Scrolls universe is connected. While NPCs do have individuality within it, that doesn't change that to the Godhead they're all simply part of the dream. Now it's time to tell you who the Godhead is. Many fans think it's Lorkhan, but I don't think so. Though we are going to talk about him again later. Another common guess is Todd Howard, since he's the prime mover of the modern Elder Scrolls games. But I don't think that's right either. I believe that the Godhead is us, the players, and that the dream in the metaphoric sense is playing Elder Scrolls games. In Kirkbride's works, there seems to be a notion of all things being connected, which is a notion right out of Hinduism. Really, there's a lot of ties to Eastern traditions in his work, and this notion of a divine being as a collective is also a very Eastern way of thinking. So yeah, I think that we are the Godhead, and playing Elder Scrolls is like our lucid dream because 1, it's contingent upon us, it doesn't exist independently of us playing, and 2, because of our impact on reality within the games through our choices. So how does one become an Amaranth? Let's start with the namesake, the scarab that transforms into the new man. This is a reference to the life cycle of scarabs. They lay a single egg in a ball of dung, and eventually this egg hatches into a larva, and slowly grows into a scarab, at which point it emerges from the ball. Now let's apply that to Vivek's instructions. The secret tower within the tower is the shape of the only name of God, I. So remember, we're in the begotten hole in the middle of the wheel looking outward, and this is what we see. An eye within a looping eye. So how does this all fit together? Well, the disc is the world egg, or divine shell as Mankar Camoran puts it. And as long as one has achieved Chim, they will be able to concentrate on this interior eye long enough to form a breach from it, thus breaching the divine shell and establishing a connection between themselves and the outside world, the world outside of the game. This in turn makes them part of the Godhead, their own player. In other words, breaching the confines of the Elder Scrolls universe allows them to understand the collective of fans that is the Godhead, and that the true beauty of Elder Scrolls is playing. So they join the fun, they become part of the Godhead, a player. That's what I believe Kirkbride is going for here. I believe an Amaranth is an NPC that has become their own player. I mean, no one would use development mode if no one played the games, right? So yeah, I believe that the sixth walking way, the scarab that transforms into the new man, is realizing that the dream is playing Elder Scrolls games and joining the fun. So how does Lorkhan factor into this one? Sermon 10 pretty clearly refers to Lorkhan as a scarab, but why? Well, because he made Mundus, the world egg. He's the father scarab. So did Lorkhan become an Amaranth? No. But he did something similar. I think that right before Lorkhan was executed, he had this Obi-Wan moment in which he visualized the eye within the infinite eye. But he did not achieve Chim first, so he never mastered himself, never conquered his flaws. So when he pictured the eye within the infinite eye, his concentration broke due to his lack of content, and the interior eye broke apart into many more eyes scattered throughout the infinite eye. Thus, Lorkhan himself was divided. He broke apart into smaller Lorkhans which scattered throughout the Arbus. Which is why he is now part of the Arbus, or as Mankar Camoran puts it, Scarab I Arbex. Though it's important to remember that Lorkhan forewent Chim on purpose, so this could have all been part of his plan, his grand scheme of self-sacrifice to help others. So the goal of this walking way is to become a new man, an Amaranth, a player. And one does that by keeping the eye intact, which becomes a breach in the divine shell, the confines of the game, which connects the Mantle Taker to the outside world, making them a player. Given this interpretation of the scarab that transforms into the new man, there's a passage in the love letter from the Fifth Era that we must analyze. Those who do not fail become the new men, an individual beyond all eye, unerased and all being, jumping beyond the last bridge of all existence is the last existence, the eternal I. So Amaranths are unerased and all being because they have joined the Godhead. They are players, which to most in the Elder Scrolls universe is an unfathomable concept. So the author is just trying as best they can to define it. The last bridge of existence is the breach formed by the interior eye. It's the jump from only existing in the games to also existing outside of the games due to being part of the Godhead, which to NPCs is the last existence, the eternal I, since it's outside of what is comprehensible to them. I am, a whole world of you, God, God outside of all else but his own free consciousness, hallucinating for eternity and falling into love. I am and I are all we. Here Kirkbride is referring to the immersive nature of Elder Scrolls games. Hallucinating for eternity and falling into love is playing Elder Scrolls games forever because they're great games. I mean, 11 years ago I decided to give Skyrim a try and look at me now. I am and I are all we means I exist and I am part of the Godhead. No love to avoid the landfall, my brothers and sisters of the past. The new man becomes God, becomes Amaranth. Everlasting hypnagogic. Hallucinations become lucid under his eye, and therefore, like all parents of their children, the Amaranth cherishes and adores all that come from him. Dreams are lucid when the dreamer knows that they are dreaming, thus can control the dream. So the Amaranth's dream is lucid because as a player they can alter the dream, which is what we do when we play Elder Scrolls games. And remember, at this point the Amaranth is both in the dream and the dreamer, so he cherishes everything that comes from him, the things he dreams of, because he loves Elder Scrolls games. Now for this last part, I'm just going to read my interpretation of what Kirkbride has here. I am the Godhead. I love playing Elder Scrolls games. Walk the sixth path and join the Godhead. You'll love playing too. We all share our love of Elder Scrolls games. We love playing. There are also some lines from the Tower that we should look at. It is the existence of the true self within the universal self, and is embodied by the fourth constellation, and is guarded by the thief, the third. The thief is another metaphorical absolute. In this case, he represents the taking of the tower, and sometimes more importantly, the taking of the tower's secret. the true self within the universal self, the eye within the looping eye, the Amaranth within the Godhead. The tower constellation being guarded by the thief is a reference to the old birth sign system, but also has symbolic significance. One seemingly needs to have the attributes of thief to reach Amaranth, and perhaps Chim too, which will come back later. The tower's secret is that you matter even though you are zero-summed. Existing within the Godhead is awesome, and the omnibenevolence that comes with it is also awesome. How to permanently exist beyond duplexity, antithesis, or trouble. This is not an easy concept, I know. Imagine being able to feel with all your senses the relentless alien terror that is God and your place in it, which is everywhere and therefore nowhere, and realizing that it means the total dissolution of your individuality into boundless being. Imagine that and still being able to say I. The I is the tower. Since Amaranths are part of the Godhead, they are infinite, thus beyond duplexity, antithesis, and trouble. They're players playing a game, which is a very difficult concept for most NPCs to understand. The alien terror is us. Imagine how confused an NPC would be to look at us. And of course the result is zero-summing. However, there's an I within the infinite I, an individual within the boundless being, which is the Amaranth's place within the alien terror. Being part of the Godhead does not mean that you don't exist, it simply means you exist within the Godhead. And I mean they get to play from inside the game. I wish I could do that. Now that we've covered the path of the Godhead, I'd like to share a few additional thoughts. Some of you may have noticed that my take on the eyes that the towers form is a bit different than what most fans suggest, which is because of my take on the wheel as Vivek trying to describe a disc. Most fans don't make a clear distinction between the first tower and the secret tower, and I think that's often because they're just not sure if there is a distinction. But based on how Vivek presents them in Sermon 21, I think they are definitely two different things, which fits with my interpretation. The first tower is the disc on its side, and the secret tower is looking at the secret triangular gate on its side from the hole in the disc. So there's two towers, two capital I's. This counts as one because the interior eye is considered part of the bigger one, part of the Godhead. So I have a question for those of you that have some familiarity with skepticism. There are two eyes. The first one leads to the second one, and the second one is more significant than the first one. Can you think of a reason why Kirkbride may have structured his grand system of transcendence this way? I think that this is most definitely a play on Descartes' I think, therefore I am, which he ripped off from Augustine's Valor ergo sum, I err, therefore I am. But most people are more familiar with the former. Understanding the reality of one's existence is a huge part of the path of the Godhead, a notion which is encompassed in I think, therefore I am. Even though Vivek is in a game and is zero-summed, that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't exist. I mean, look, here he is. He simply exists as a character within a game. Most fans that attempt to explain Chim focus on this element of it. I leaned more on the omnibenevolence because I think that often goes underexplored. Now let's talk more about attaining the wheel. Sermon 17 makes this out to be the NPC physically turning into a wheel within the Arbic wheel. And remember, another way Vivek describes the Arbis is a cluster of bubbles with bubbles within bubbles and bubbles colliding with other bubbles, you get the idea. So, is there something else occurring to you about this notion of making a wheel within the wheel, another disc within the disc, or bubbles within bubbles? If anyone's thinking about pocket realms right now, very good. So, are pocket realms wheels within the Arbic wheel that perhaps NPCs that cleared the Psijic Endeavor made? I believe they are. Additionally, there are some structures in the Elder Scrolls universe that sort of resemble discs and/or wheels that we need to discuss. The prominent examples that come to mind are the Imperial City and the College of Winterhold. Is it possible that these are pocket realms that we simply don't know about? If so, that could help explain the Great Sea Collapse. I promise you I will cover the Great Sea Collapse someday, but not today. So these could be secret pocket realms sitting on Nirn. However, there's another angle we must explore here. When the College of Winterhold support card is summoned in the Elder Scrolls Legends card game, the following Elnifex plays. Igartok, Pad Home, Chiamai Altadun. My guess is that means something like I'm the player, the agent of change, love is my weapon. But the important word here is Chim. Given everything we've talked about, how might this rough shape aid NPCs in achieving Chim? Look at more than just the big circle, look at the whole thing. I believe this is meant to resemble the inside of a Samsung disk drive from an original Xbox, which makes sense given that it was the current console when Kirkbride wrote all this stuff. Morrowind was not on PlayStation, it was PC, Xbox only. Also, I still haven't explained the physical element of the secret triangular gate, have I? Well, look what happens when we connect the dots on this shape, we get a triangle. However, it's not in the whole of the disc. Nevertheless, I do think this is part of where Kirkbride gets the triangle from. It's inspired by this triangle. So yeah, I think the idea for the shaping of these structures is they're meant to resemble a Samsung disk drive from an original Xbox. And if building physical towers helps with the walking ways, then I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that building a disk drive could as well. Thus, why the College of Winterhold is related to Chim. So that's the deal with Pocket Realms and that shape. But I'm sure some of you are wondering about Lig as well. For those who don't know, Lig is essentially the Elder Scrolls' equivalent of the Upside Down, if you're familiar with D&D or Stranger Things. According to Kirkbride, the inspiration for Lig is that one day he and some of the other developers accidentally ruined a paper map of Tamriel. One of the things that contributed to the destruction of the map was the fire alarm went off and the sound it made was lig-a-lig-a-lig-a-lig-a-lig. So I guess the idea is the map that they destroyed is Lig. We don't know much about it from the lore, but we know it's where the Dreg originated from and it was once ruled by Molag Bal. Also, it was created by some bizarre event in which Nirn was folded up, or turned on its side, which is of course a metaphor for how they destroyed the map. So here's my best in-universe guess as to how Lig was created. Vivek tells us that many Atata tried to see the tower as Lorkhan did, and I'm betting that Molag Bal was among them. And he's all about control, really he's a fairly straightforward, one-dimensional evil god. So imagine him attempting to walk the path of the godhead. Achieving Chim requires an amount of humility that Molag Bal would never have, so there's no way he made it this far. He's all about forcing and bending things to his will. So, I bet that rather than patiently observing the tower, then reorienting himself to see the wheel, he tried to physically turn the wheel, and this created Lig. I also considered that it might simply be a play on putting the disc in upside down, you know, like how some discs are double-sided and there's like a secret on the other side, but I like the first idea much better. Now regarding the sixth walking path, we must discuss the Elder Scrolls VI. At this point, we are fairly certain that the setting is Hammerfell and possibly High Rock 2. From that, Drumora did a video in which he speculated that the plot of ES6 might be that the Thalmor are trying to use the Creation Towers to unmake Mundus. You can check out his video about that with the link in the top right, and at this point I believe he is correct. So what does that have to do with the scarab that transforms into the new man? Well, scarabs live in the desert, so in Elder Scrolls they dwell in Hammerfell. So it's very possible that the reason Kirkbride names this walking way the scarab that transforms into the new man is because it has something to do with Hammerfell. So where am I going with all this? Well, Drumora's idea for the plot entails some writing opportunities that border on fourth wall breaking, much like becoming an Amaranth. So, I think we may observe the scarab that transforms into the new man in Elder Scrolls VI. My guess is it would either happen at the end of the main quest or in a DLC like how the hero of Kvatch walks the fourth walking way in the Shivering Isles. I mean, that was Elder Scrolls 4 and we completed the fourth walking way, and there's a case to be made that the Nerevarine completed the third walking way in the Elder Scrolls 3. So will we complete the sixth walking way in the Elder Scrolls 6? Maybe. Now let's talk about the concept of god trios. The Tribunal are linked together because they have walked at least one walking way together, the third. Vivek says that they completed the sixth together, but remember that's just him covering up what they really did. It's this big secret that they tampered with the Heart of Lorkhan until the Nerevarine exposes them. There's significant reason to believe that no one has ever made it to Amaranth, since Kirkbride himself seemingly confirms that neither Vivek nor Talos did. So back to trios. Throughout my reading of the 36 lessons, something kept nagging at me. How did AM and Set know that they needed to make Vek? Almalexia, AM seemingly decides out of nowhere to use this Netchman's wife as a surrogate for a very unusual organism, which ends up becoming Vek, who we now know as Vivek. So how did they know to do this? To start, I think that Sophisil and Almalexia did complete the Psijic endeavor. Why? Because the Clockwork City is a pocket realm. And remember, my guess for pocket realms is that beings that have achieved the endeavor, hence have become makers, can create pocket realms. So it seems like Sophisil completed the endeavor, and if he did, then he probably helped Almalexia figure it out too. So they were aware of the first tower, the disc on its side. But remember, it seems like only thieves can move on to Chim, and Almalexia was a warrior and Sophisil was a mage. So how does all this add up? I don't think Vivec originally existed. I think that the original story is that on that fateful day on Red Mountain, Sophisil and Almalexia tampered with the heart and used this opportunity to harness the third walking way. They took advantage of story rewriting to write Vivec into the story, because from the Endeavor they knew that they needed a thief to take the tower, thus reaching Chim. So I think this concept of trios is an exploit to at least some of the walking ways, particularly the Path of the Godhead. It seems like the attributes of warrior, mage, and thief are all required to some extent to walk the whole path, which is perhaps another play on what it takes to play Elder Scrolls games, since we all know it's hard to commit to just one style for a whole playthrough. I mean, to really get the full experience out of an Elder Scrolls game, there are going to be times that you need to sneak, that you need to use magic, that you need to use a sword. I think you get the idea. So the exploit is that the warrior, mage, and thief don't all have to be in the same being. You can split them up like the Tribunal did. And I don't think that the Tribunal are the only beings to have ever discovered this. Tiber Septim, thief, Wolfarth, warrior, and Arctis, mage. Also, there's less to go on for this one, but how about Boethia, warrior, Azura, mage, and Mephala, thief? Could be that there's more to this connection between the good Daedra than we know, who knows? This notion of trios being an exploit also helped me make sense of an issue I was having with my take on becoming an Amaranth. If becoming an Amaranth is as simple as I presented it to be, then why didn't Vivec or Talos ever reach it? Well, exploits often come with setbacks, don't they? So my guess is that if you use this trio exploit, then the whole triumvirate has to become an Amaranth to do it. So the others would have to gain the attributes of Thief and achieve Chim to do it. So why didn't Vivec and Talos just have their buddies do that? Well, assuming the basic story of the Arcturian heresy is accurate, Tiber and Wolfarth didn't really get along toward the end, did they? But Vivec is harder, though it could be as simple as he just didn't know that that's what was wrong. I mean, it's not like anyone would have told him that that's what he needed to do. Or it could be as simple as he did not desire to be an Amaranth. And I feel like that fits the character. Vivec is very content. So that's what I'm going to go with. In summary, for these god trios, it's possible that they were inspired by the original creators of Elder Scrolls, Ted Peterson, Vijay Lakshman, and Julian LeFay, and I hope they were, because that would be a great homage to them. Finally, there's a section of Sermon 35 that I think is the perfect thing to conclude with. Here's the text, and I'm just going to read my interpretation of it. Being immersed in Elder Scrolls games is the player's call to action against the conflicts the game has in store for them. The reader will confront the true nature of their reality, the Psijic Endeavor, and it will seem silly to them. On that day, the reader will make a sacrifice, though it's not as big a sacrifice as it will seem at first. To do so, they will have to walk the path of the Godhead and become their own player. The Godhead is in love with Elder Scrolls games, which is contingent upon the conflict, the evil that they present the Godhead with. The reader must learn to love that evil as well to join the Godhead. They must become omnibenevolent. To retain themselves, the reader must accept the true nature of their reality and observe the secret eye, which is to realize that it doesn't matter. Their existence within the game is beautiful. Through omnibenevolence, the reader does not have to despair in the endless void outside of the Elder Scrolls games. This state of existence is only ever obtained by walkers of the six ways. The path of the Godhead is especially challenging. The other walking ways are easier, but not as worth the walk. The best walking way is the fifth, Chim, which is also the number of corners Nirn has. Though becoming a player takes this to another level, playing the game is the best way to live and love. The fun is both in the order of the world and in the chaos, which is why creation began with both Anu and Padome, whom those that have walked the path of the Godhead know never really existed in the Elder Scrolls games. They're simply characters or even just concepts that Kirkbride invented that exist only in the lore. We, the players, are inevitably a padomaic force. When we insert the disc, when we cause these bubbles to intersect, we set in course a sequence of events that creates the Arvis. That is the brush between stasis and change. Anu, stasis, is the unplayed disc fresh out of the box, and Padome, change, is our act of putting the disc in the console and starting a new game, transforming the unaltered files that Bethesda sent our way into a game. And as we play, we are the agents of change. Our progression through the quests, the choices we make, the bugs and other pitfalls we experience, that is Padome's influence in Mundus. So my friends, say it with me, Igar Tok, Pad Home, Chimai Altadun. That's it for this video, folks. This has been an exploration of the 6 walking ways, though really it was so much more. Michael Kirkbride is such a genius, and his writing style is absolutely perfect for Elder Scrolls. Diving this deep into his work was extremely difficult, but also so enlightening, and I hope you thought so too. Thank you all so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and share this with your friends. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.